Hi, and welcome to another episode of CISO Talks. Today, we're joined by Matt Graves. He is the VP of Cybersecurity over at MajorKey Technologies. Matt, welcome to the show.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Cool. Yeah. So, well, thank you for spending the time to talk to us today. Would you be able to just start with giving us a little bit of information about yourself and what you kind of currently do day to day over there at MajorKey Technologies?
Yeah, absolutely. So working at MajorKey Technologies, I kind of have, multiple hats. So working with not only in the pre-sales role, but also mainly in advisory. So working with customers and their day-to-day, I wouldn't say problems, but things that they're looking to, how do they mature their cybersecurity programs, but really a large focus in identity access governance and really identity security. So really all of those, the multiple pieces there. And what I'm able to do is take my experience working in the IT space for now over 20 years, but really a large time of that in the identity security space, and starting from my experience implementing the solutions to the architecting of those solutions all the way to really, like I was mentioning, really the advisory component of that. So from the process part of that, and not even looking at product, and looking through, okay, what are they doing in data governance, the identity governance side, access management, all of those parts and pieces, and how can they then put those into a roadmap and look at things from that program perspective, and getting rid of that project, that piece by piece perspective as they're implementing these solutions.
Right, yeah, and I think as you say, kind of implementing these things as or implementing these processes as programs rather than implementing them as kind of individual projects. One of the things we talked about previously was really adopting zero trust, but once again, not as a kind of an individual project per se, but actually implementing it as a program. Could you can you explain to me why this is important and why this is the kind of the first step, and why organizations should implement it as a program and not just see it as an individual project?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's a great question, because a lot of times organizations, if they look at it from a project by project basis, people aren't really talking to each other, because the access management team, as an example, they're implementing a single sign-on solution or a way to help with provisioning accounts. So they're looking at it from that regard. And, you know, the audit team needs something to verify who has access to what. So they're working with the identity governance team, and really nobody's talking to each other. And there's the last time, or when you hear about when something's about to go live, is when there's this last minute kind of emergency notification saying, hey, look, we're going live this weekend, and there's really no buy-in. From a program perspective, we're now bringing that all the way to the top and saying, okay, so we're going to manage all of these projects together, or these solutions together, to implement, access management with the identity governance solution, the data governance solution, and everything else, to say, okay, now we know who has access to what, and we're going to bring that, through the access management and the identity governance solution together. So now we can bring all this information into one place. And now we also want to be aware of what's going on in the networking side, and locking down the security components, and what's going on with the maybe directory updates and everything else. So I'm working with a customer now that's going through those types of pains, and by bringing this into a single view, now we have a program manager that's able to see all the different components, able to communicate across the board up to the C level and that C suite and the VPs and everything else, to say, okay, here's the status of the entire program and the individual projects. Are they green, yellow, red, and able to say, yes, we're on time. We're gonna meet all of our timelines and everything else. So it's really important in that regard, because now you can also communicate cross team, and you're all on the same calls, maybe once a week, once every 2 weeks, to make sure really everything's flowing and, like I was mentioning, able to communicate across the entire program.
Mhm. So there's a kind of a dedicated lead. I think you said a program manager, as it were, and I think you kind of you touched on something that's absolutely key, in my opinion, for something like this to work, and that is, of course, making sure that there's strong communication between the various departments within a business, as we know, is not always the best. So that being said, and you kind of briefly touched on it, but how would you, rather than kind of seeing this as a specific project, it would have to be kind of very efficient in the way that it's implemented, and there'll be a lot of moving parts. So how do you think, or how do you recommend a program like this should be communicated to get buy-in from the rest of the business?
Yeah, and the big part to this, and I know I spoke about kind of when the program is in flow, and everything's really in action, and there's been some buy-in there. But pre all of that, as you're looking to go down, this multi-year journey, as we all know, zero trust is not an overnight or a single project type implementation, but understanding and putting together, the program communication aspect of this, and going to the C-suite and getting the buy-in is, forget all the stories we're seeing in the news. I mean, we see something every day of what's going on, but to further secure the environment, and, we're already talking about these solutions anyways, and we understand that security is an important, really vital part of what needs to be implemented. But put together, that presentation to, the upper management to get buy-in, and, make, establish that as going in together, having, your directory services team and your access management team and your identity governance team, work across the board to communicate this large program, instead of going in as, well, we all have these individual projects that we want to do, and, we're all kind of biting off the budget in our individual pieces, but going in to establish, this is why we need each of these, but how they're going to tie together, and, what's the ultimate, the end point, and what are the success criteria we're going to meet as a part of this, and putting together that longer term timeline of how we're going to, let's say year 1, 3, 5, how all this is going to pull together to implement into the organization, and why it's important to put these things and bring them in together. And I think as a part of that, as you're looking at, we know we're talking about budgetary items, and we know the solutions that are out there are, they're not cheap in any stretch. But I think by working across the across the organization, across the teams, with a single goal in mind, that helps, bring that up to the executive leadership to make better decisions as you're communicating this and presenting to those teams.
Yeah, and I think by all of the different kind of teams and departments, the teams within those departments kind of working together underneath a program manager, is obviously going to be able to really demonstrate the actual business value. Once again, if you've got all of these different departments working in silo, not communicating with each other, it's going to be very hard to allocate a budget to a program that of this size. But if we can allocate those kind of smaller individual budgets for different business initiatives, and then they all tie up, and it's led by this program manager. Yeah, it totally makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, absolutely.